What you're about to hear isn't the sanitized version found in textbooks. According to declassified operational reports and sniper after-action testimonies, the most relentless enemy American snipers faced in Southeast Asia was not always a man holding a rifle. It was the ground beneath their boots, the air they breathed, the silence that moved. Military records show that long before a single shot was fired, the jungle had already begun its work, bending bodies, fracturing bones, and grinding nerves down to instinct alone. Pay close attention, because this is the side of the war few are willing to discuss. Not the firefights, not the kill counts, but the slow, methodical violence of terrain itself. Dense rainforest swallowed visibility. Mountains rose like walls of wet stone. Mud clung to ankles with a suction that felt deliberate. Every step forward carried the possibility of permanent injury. In this environment, a sniper didn't just stalk an enemy, he negotiated with gravity, moisture, rot, and exhaustion, knowing the jungle would always demand payment. For U.S. jungle snipers, movement was never neutral. It was dangerous by default. Operational logs from Vietnam repeatedly note fractures, torn ligaments, and spinal injuries occurring far from any contact with enemy forces. A single misjudged step on a moss-covered slope could send a fully loaded soldier tumbling 10 meters downhill, weapon slamming into bone, body hitting roots and rock. Silent. Sudden. Disabling. Men were pulled from missions not because they were shot, but because their knees collapsed under the weight of gear soaked endlessly by rain. Humidity was not an inconvenience, it was an adversary. Weapons rusted faster than they could be cleaned. Optics fogged at the worst possible moments. Skin never dried. Feet remained submerged in sweat and mud for days, sometimes weeks, leading to trench foot, infections, and pain that never fully faded. Snipers learned quickly that comfort was a liability. Dryness was a memory. Pain became background noise. And then there was stillness. The unnatural stillness required of a sniper in a living jungle. To remain motionless for hours meant surrendering to the environment entirely. Leeches attached without sensation. Insects crawled into ears, noses, open wounds. But worse than that was what waited quietly in the undergrowth and branches above, predators perfected by evolution to kill without sound. Veteran testimonies describe the constant awareness of venomous snakes, particularly bamboo vipers, coiled invisibly along trails, roots, and low branches. Their camouflage was flawless. Their strike was faster than thought. A single bite, deep in the jungle, often meant death before evacuation was even possible. Snipers spoke of feeling heat build in their muscles as they lay frozen, knowing that shifting their weight even slightly could provoke a fatal reaction from something they could not see. This was the paradox of jungle sniping: movement risked falls and fractures, stillness invited poison. Every tactical decision was filtered through pain, fear, and calculation. Not just of the enemy's position, but of the jungle's temperament that day. By the time contact was made, if it was made at all, many snipers were already operating at the edge of physical failure. Dehydrated. Injured. Mentally isolated. The terrain had softened them, tested them, and in many cases, broken them before a trigger was ever pulled. This is where the story truly begins. Because to understand how American jungle snipers fought, you must first understand how the jungle fought them. Military training prepared snipers to endure hunger, fatigue, and fear. What it did not fully prepare them for was a battlefield where the terrain itself functioned as a silent weapon system. According to field manuals and first-hand accounts, Southeast Asia's geography did not merely complicate operations, it actively inflicted casualties. The jungle didn't just slow men down. It injured them. Permanently. Steep ridgelines dominated much of the operational landscape. These weren't clean, rocky mountain paths. They were slick, eroded slopes layered with wet leaves, decomposing vegetation, and loose soil that shifted under weight. A sniper moving with 80 pounds of gear had seconds to react if his footing failed, and often, there was no reaction at all. Veterans recount the sound of bone striking stone echoing through ravines, followed by a kind of silence that felt final. No gunfire. No explosion. Just gravity doing its work. After-action reports document broken ankles, shattered wrists, cracked ribs, and spinal compression injuries occurring during insertion or exfiltration. These injuries didn't happen in dramatic moments. They happened during careful movement, while attempting to remain invisible. Ironically, the very caution required of a sniper increased the risk. Slow, deliberate steps meant prolonged exposure to unstable ground. One slip could end a mission or a career. Mud was omnipresent. Thick, adhesive, relentless. It filled boots, coated weapons, and swallowed trails overnight. Snipers described mud that pulled at their legs like hands, draining energy with every step. Over time, joints inflamed. Knees failed. Hips locked. Pain became cumulative. There was no recovery time. Missions stacked back to back. The body simply adapted or collapsed. But the physical damage was only half the equation. The psychological effect of knowing the terrain could incapacitate you without warning was profound. Snipers spoke of a constant internal calculation, not just where to move, but whether moving was worth the risk. Every descent raised the same question: if I fall here, will anyone reach me in time? Isolation intensified this fear. Jungle snipers often operated in two-man teams or entirely alone, far from immediate support. A broken leg in that environment was not a medical emergency, it was a death sentence in slow motion. Evacuation depended on weather, enemy presence, and extraction zones that might not exist. Many snipers admitted they feared injury more than enemy contact. An enemy could be anticipated. The jungle could not. And still, they had to move. Because remaining in one place too long introduced another danger: detection. The jungle amplified sound unpredictably. A snapped branch could echo for hundreds of meters. A dislodged stone could betray a position built over days. So snipers advanced, despite the pain, despite the risk, accepting that the terrain was actively hunting them. This constant negotiation with the ground reshaped tactics. Routes were chosen not for speed, but survivability. Snipers avoided obvious high ground if it meant treacherous climbs. Shots were passed up because repositioning afterward could be fatal. The jungle dictated tempo. It decided when a sniper could act and when he had to endure. By the time these men reached firing positions, their bodies were already compromised. Muscles trembled. Joints burned. Focus narrowed. And yet, the most dangerous threat was still waiting, alive, silent, and coiled within arm's reach. Because in this jungle, the ground wasn't the only thing that could strike without warning. According to medical evacuation logs and sniper debriefings, the most feared enemy in the jungle rarely announced itself. It did not shout, fire, or move in formation. It waited. Camouflaged so perfectly that even trained eyes missed it. Venomous wildlife, especially snakes, imposed a constant psychological pressure that never eased, not even in sleep. Among them, bamboo vipers became a symbol of quiet terror. Green, motionless, and nearly invisible against wet foliage, they inhabited exactly the same spaces snipers relied on for concealment: low branches, tree roots, fallen logs, and narrow jungle paths. Their presence forced a cruel contradiction. To survive as a sniper, you had to remain still. To survive the jungle, stillness could get you killed. Veterans described the sensation of lying prone for hours, muscles screaming for relief, while knowing that a shift of weight might bring a hand, knee, or neck within striking distance of a coiled viper. You couldn't swat it away. You couldn't flinch. A sudden movement could trigger an instinctive strike faster than conscious thought. One bite, often painless at first, could end everything within minutes. Field reports confirm that anti-venom was rarely immediately available in deep jungle operations. Evacuation times were long. Weather interfered. Landing zones were uncertain. Snipers understood the math: if bitten far from extraction, survival was unlikely. That knowledge altered behavior in subtle but profound ways. Men scanned the ground more than the horizon. They learned to recognize unnatural stillness, a curve that didn't belong, a texture that seemed wrong. But the jungle punished distraction. The same vigilance required to detect enemy movement now had to be split between ground, branches, and peripheral motion. Fatigue made this harder. Dehydration blurred focus. Pain narrowed attention. The longer a sniper remained deployed, the higher the probability of a fatal oversight. And snakes were only part of the equation. Spiders the size of a hand. Scorpions in boots. Swarms of insects that turned stillness into torture. But venom was different. Venom was final. It introduced an invisible countdown into every mission. Psychologically, this created a unique strain. Snipers spoke of feeling hunted by the environment itself. Not actively attacked, but observed. Surrounded. As if the jungle was alive and waiting for weakness. Sleep, when it came, was shallow. Dreams were fragmented. Many veterans later admitted that years after the war, they still checked the ground before sitting down. Still froze when something brushed their leg. Tactically, the threat of wildlife influenced position selection. Perfect firing points were abandoned if they meant proximity to dense roots or overhanging branches. Shots were delayed. Opportunities lost. The jungle extracted its toll not only in blood, but in hesitation. By this stage, the sniper was fighting on two fronts, one against a human enemy who could be studied and predicted, and one against a biological system that operated on instinct alone. No warning. No mercy. Just reaction. And as missions dragged on, something deeper began to erode, not the body, but the mind. Because prolonged exposure to pain, isolation, and constant lethal uncertainty changes how a man thinks. The jungle didn't just injure snipers. It rewired them. By the time a jungle sniper reached operational maturity, his decision-making process had been fundamentally altered. Not by doctrine, but by survival. According to long-term behavioral studies conducted after the war and corroborated by veteran interviews, prolonged exposure to extreme terrain, constant injury risk, and biological threats forced snipers into a state of continuous psychological compression. Every choice carried weight. Every movement had consequences that could not be reversed. Pain was no longer a signal to stop. It became a condition of existence. Knees swollen from repeated descents. Ankles permanently unstable. Back strained from endless hours motionless under soaked equipment. Medical reports show that many snipers operated with injuries that, under normal conditions, would have required evacuation. In the jungle, evacuation was theoretical. The mission came first. The body adapted or failed silently. Isolation intensified everything. Jungle snipers rarely had visual contact with friendly forces. Radio silence was common. Days passed without hearing another human voice. This isolation stripped away external validation. There was no immediate feedback, no reassurance. Only internal judgment. Veterans describe a narrowing of mental focus, where the world shrank to breath control, muscle tension, and threat assessment. Emotions flattened. Empathy dulled. Survival demanded efficiency. And yet, the same isolation magnified fear. Not panic, something colder. More controlled. Fear became a constant analytical process. If I move now, I risk falling. If I don't move, I risk discovery or a snake. If I take the shot, can I extract without breaking myself on the way out? These calculations happened under physical stress and cognitive fatigue. Decisions that would normally take minutes were compressed into seconds, often while muscles trembled and sweat blurred vision. Tactical doctrine collided with bodily reality. Sometimes, the correct military decision was ignored because the body simply could not comply. After-action reports reveal a pattern: snipers passing on high-value targets due to terrain constraints. A perfect shot meant nothing if exfiltration required descending a slope known for injuries. The jungle didn't just influence tactics, it vetoed them. Commanders rarely saw this layer of the battlefield. From above, a position looked ideal. From the ground, it was a trap. Psychologically, this bred a quiet resentment. Not toward leadership, but toward the environment itself. Veterans spoke of feeling betrayed by the jungle, as if it actively resisted every attempt to master it. Over time, many snipers developed hyper-control behaviors, obsessively testing ground, rehearsing movements mentally, freezing for extended periods rather than risk change. This reduced injury risk but increased mental strain. The cumulative effect was profound. Sleep deprivation, chronic stress, a constant readiness for catastrophe. Even moments of success were muted. A confirmed hit brought no relief, only the next calculation. How to move. Where to place weight. What unseen threat might be waiting. By the final stages of deployment, many snipers were no longer fighting to dominate terrain. They were negotiating survival, minute by minute. The jungle had imposed its rules. Break them, and it punished without hesitation. And when these men finally left Southeast Asia, the jungle did not release them as easily as they left it. Because the last wounds it inflicted were invisible and permanent. What military records rarely capture is what happened after the missions ended. After the rifles were cleaned for the last time. After the jungle was left behind. For many American jungle snipers, the terrain that broke their bodies also reshaped their minds in ways that never fully healed. Medical evaluations conducted years after Southeast Asia deployments reveal a pattern: chronic joint degeneration, spinal injuries, nerve damage, and mobility issues directly tied to prolonged movement in extreme jungle terrain. These were not the wounds of combat in the traditional sense. No medals. No dramatic stories. Just bodies worn down by gravity, moisture, and relentless strain. Men in their 30s walk like they were twice that age. But the deeper damage was psychological. Veterans described an enduring hyper-awareness of their surroundings. The inability to relax in forests. The reflex to scan the ground before every step. Sudden freezes when something brushed against their leg. The jungle had trained their nervous systems to expect punishment without warning. Decades later, that conditioning remained. Former snipers spoke of dreams filled not with gunfire, but with falling. Slipping. Being unable to move while something unseen approached. The same paralysis they experienced in the jungle, caught between the need for stillness and the instinct to survive, replayed endlessly. Silent. Claustrophobic. Inescapable. Historians now argue that jungle warfare represented a fundamentally different psychological battlefield. One where the enemy was not just human, but environmental. A war fought against ecosystems that do not negotiate. That do not recognize courage or discipline. They only respond to weakness. This is why many veterans struggle to explain their experience. How do you describe fighting mud? How do you explain fear of the ground itself? The jungle did not leave scars that could be easily shown. But it shaped behavior, relationships, and self-perception long after the war ended. And yet, within this suffering, there was endurance. Adaptation. A grim form of mastery. Jungle snipers learned to function in conditions designed to break the human body. They made decisions under pain, isolation, and constant threat, not for glory, but for survival and duty. Their war was quieter. Slower. More intimate. And in many ways, more unforgiving. The terrain of Southeast Asia did not just influence the outcome of operations. It became an active participant in the war. A force that demanded sacrifice every single day. And for those who lived through it, its presence never truly faded. This story is not just about snipers. It's about the cost of fighting a war against geography itself. If you found this investigation valuable, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. These stories deserve to be remembered, not for spectacle, but for truth.